Canada is standing at the edge of a decision that could shake NATO from the inside. For decades, Ottawa depended on American fighter jets, American engines, American software, and American approval. But now, a Swedish fighter jet, a British engine, and a production line in Montreal could give Canada something it has not had since the fall of the Avro era: real control over its own air power. And if this plan succeeds, it will not just challenge the F-35 program, it could break America's hidden grip over NATO's fighter future.
For months, Canada's future air power has been caught inside a quiet but intense geopolitical battle. On one side stands America's F-35 program, led by Lockheed Martin. On the other side stands Sweden's Saab, pushing Ottawa to look at the Gripen fighter jet as a serious alternative. And the timing could not be more dramatic. Just as Prime Minister Mark Carney ordered a review of Canada's F-35 deal, Saab stepped forward with a proposal that could change far more than Canada's fighter fleet. This is no longer just about which aircraft Canada buys. This is about power, control, and independence. For decades, NATO air forces have depended heavily on American military technology. From the F-16 and F-15 to the F-A-18 and F-35, much of NATO's air strength runs through U.S.-controlled engines, software, spare parts, upgrades, and maintenance systems. In simple words, if a country wants to modify, upgrade, export, or deeply control these aircraft, Washington often holds the final key. That is the system Canada has lived under for years. But now, something different is being discussed, something that could shake the foundation of that dependence. According to the proposal, Rolls-Royce could build an engine production facility in Montreal to manufacture the EJ230 engine for Saab's Gripen E/F fighters. And this is where the story becomes serious. This production line could work with very little dependence on American components, meaning Canada may avoid some of the strict limits of Washington's ITAR export control system. If this happens, Canada would not just be buying fighter jets, it would be building a new defense pathway, one where modern fighter engine production is no longer directly controlled by the United States. And that is why this moment matters. Since NATO was created in 1949, American technology has shaped the alliance's air power. But if Canada moves forward with Saab and Rolls-Royce, it could become the first NATO country to seriously challenge that old structure. It would send a powerful message across the alliance. The future of air defense may not belong only to the biggest power anymore. It may belong to the country brave enough to take control of its own sky. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second to like the video and subscribe, because what Canada decides next could change the balance of NATO air power forever.
Few countries know the painful price of dependence better than Canada. Back in the 1950s, Canada built the Avro Canada CF-105 Aero, a fighter interceptor so advanced that many believed it was ahead of its time. It was fast, powerful, and designed to protect Canadian skies with Canadian technology. But then, suddenly, the dream was killed. The Aero program was cancelled, and Canada was pushed back toward American military equipment. For Ottawa, the message was unforgettable. Building your own defense power sounds good, but if it becomes too strong, too independent, and too threatening to America's dominance, it can disappear overnight. And for decades, Canada lived with that lesson in silence. But then, the political winds began to shift. When Donald Trump returned to the political stage with a much harder tone toward Canada, everything started to look different. Tariff threats, trade battles, and sharp comments about Canada's place in the Western Alliance forced Ottawa to ask a dangerous question. Can Canada really depend on Washington forever? Suddenly, the old partnership no longer felt completely safe. It felt unpredictable. It felt vulnerable. And that is exactly when the Saab and Rolls-Royce proposal became more than just a defense deal. It became a possible escape route. At the center of this proposal is the EJ230 engine, an advanced upgrade from the same engine family that powers the Eurofighter Typhoon. This is not an untested idea. The earlier EJ230 has already proven itself with millions of flight hours and real combat experience over places like Libya, Syria, and Iraq. It is known for reliability, strong performance, and easier maintenance compared to many complex modern fighter systems. But the most powerful detail is not just the engine's performance, it is freedom. The EJ230 would not rely on core American technology, meaning it could avoid the tight grip of Washington's ITAR export control rules. And this is where the story becomes even bigger. Rolls-Royce already has a strong aerospace presence in Montreal, supporting engine maintenance, advanced manufacturing, and civilian aviation work. So Canada would not be starting from zero. It already has the foundation. It already has the skilled workers. It already has the industrial base. Building fighter engines in Montreal would not be a fantasy. It would be the next step in an ecosystem that already exists. That is why Saab's Gripen proposal is gaining attention. The more countries show interest in the Gripen EF, the stronger the business case becomes. For Canada, this is not only about buying a fighter jet, it is about rebuilding control over its own defense future. After the death of the Avro Aero, Canada learned what dependence can cost. Now, decades later, Ottawa may finally have a chance to ask the question it avoided for too long. Will Canada remain locked inside America's defense system, or will it finally take back control of its skies?
If Canada moves forward with a 72-aircraft Gripen order, the story will not stop there. It could only be the beginning. Because if Ukraine expands its fleet in the future, and countries like Colombia, Thailand, the Philippines, Portugal, or Peru also join the Gripen program, the demand for engines could explode. We are not talking about a few dozen engines anymore. We are talking about more than 400 engines within a single decade. And that kind of scale would be enough to keep a major fighter engine production line alive in Canada for years. For Montreal, this could become a historic moment. Current estimates suggest the project could create between 3,000 and 5,000 high-skilled jobs in the city alone. And when you connect that with Saab's wider global manufacturing network for the Gripen EF, the number of long-term jobs linked to this program could rise to 15,000 to 18,000 positions in the coming years. So for Quebec, this is no longer just a military purchase. This could become the spark that reshapes the entire aerospace industry of the province. But the real story is even bigger than jobs. What Canada, Saab, and Rolls-Royce are building is the foundation of a new kind of independence inside NATO. For decades, many allied countries have operated advanced fighter jets while depending heavily on Washington for engines, software, spare parts, upgrades, and approval. But if the EJ230 engine production line becomes fully operational in Montreal, that old power structure could begin to change. NATO countries could fly advanced fighters without being completely tied to America's technological control. And that is exactly the kind of shift Washington may not have expected.
And this is not a risky dream built by a small company with an uncertain future. This is Rolls-Royce, one of the biggest aerospace engine manufacturers in the world, working with Saab, one of Europe's most experienced fighter jet makers. Both are operating inside the NATO system, but with a model that gives allied nations more freedom, more control, and more options. Ukraine shows exactly why this matters. For Kiev, relying completely on America's military supply chain has always carried serious risk. If politics change in Washington, or if a domestic crisis hits the United States, weapons deliveries could slow down at the worst possible moment. In a war, that kind of delay can decide everything. But if the EJ230 engine is produced in Canada, the equation changes. Sweden could provide the fighter technology. The United Kingdom could support the engine expertise. Canada could protect and sustain the supply chain. And all of this could happen without waiting for direct approval from the United States. That is why this proposal is not just about Canada. It is about the future of NATO air power. It is about whether allied nations will remain dependent on one dominant supplier, or whether they will build a stronger, more flexible defense network of their own. And once this model proves successful in Europe, its impact will not stay there. Because in Asia, the same question is already rising. How can smaller and mid-sized nations defend themselves without becoming completely dependent on Washington? Thailand has been dealing with one major problem for years: American technology restrictions. Bangkok already operates older Gripen fighters, but those jets use the RM-12 engine, which comes from the American GE F404 engine family.
That means whenever Thailand wants a major upgrade, modification, or new system integration, the process can become slow, complicated, and dependent on Washington's approval. And for a country sitting in a region full of rising tensions and competing global powers, that kind of dependence is not just frustrating, it is strategically dangerous. This is where the EJ230 engine could change everything. If Thailand moves toward the newer Gripen EF, powered by a British-built engine and supported through Canadian production, Bangkok would gain something it has wanted for years: freedom. Thailand could integrate its own systems, adjust the aircraft to match its own battlefield needs, and shape its fighter fleet according to its own national strategy, without waiting for permission from the Pentagon. For a country trying to balance relations with the United States, China, and other regional powers, that level of control is priceless. And that is why Saab's Gripen E is no longer just being seen as another fighter jet. It is becoming a symbol of a new defense model. European technology, North American manufacturing, full NATO compatibility, but without total dependence on Washington's technology control system. This is the kind of shift that may not make loud headlines at first, but quietly, it can change the power structure inside the Western alliance.
Because the real question is no longer only about which aircraft is better. The deeper question is this: is NATO truly an alliance of equal partners, or is it a system where the strongest country keeps influence through engines, software, spare parts, and supply chains? That question is now becoming harder to ignore. And surprisingly, part of the answer may be forming far away from political summits, inside factories in Montreal. Every EJ230 engine produced in Canada would represent more than engineering. It would represent a small step towards strategic independence. Every new supply chain, every new partner, and every new Gripen customer would slowly reduce the old dependence on one dominant power. This does not mean NATO is breaking apart. It means NATO may be changing into something different, an alliance where countries can still cooperate, but also protect their own defense freedom. And that is what makes this story so important. The future balance of NATO air power may not be decided only in Washington, Brussels, or London. It may be shaped quietly in Montreal, one engine at a time. And as each production line expands, each aircraft is delivered, and each country gains a real alternative, a new order inside NATO begins to take shape.
In the end, Canada's fighter decision is no longer just about replacing old aircraft. It is about choosing the kind of future Canada wants for itself. One path keeps Ottawa tied to the familiar American defense system, where power, upgrades, software, engines, and supply chains remain deeply connected to Washington. The other path opens the door to something far more independent, a NATO fighter ecosystem built through Sweden's technology, Britain's engine expertise, and Canada's industrial strength. And that is what makes the Saab, Rolls-Royce, and Gripen proposal so powerful. It is not only a military deal, it is a challenge to decades of dependence. From the painful memory of the Avro arrow to the modern uncertainty of global politics, Canada has learned one hard lesson again and again. A nation that cannot control its defense future can never fully control its strategic destiny. If the EJ230 production line rises in Montreal, it could become more than a factory. It could become a symbol of a new NATO era, where allies still stand together, but no longer depend completely on one power for permission, protection, or survival. And that is why Washington will be watching closely, because once Canada proves that another path is possible, other nations may follow. The real question now is simple, but powerful. Will Canada remain a customer inside someone else's defense empire, or will it finally become a builder of its own air power future? The answer may not just reshape Canada's Air Force, it could quietly reshape the balance of power inside NATO itself. If you found this deep dive valuable, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about the technology, politics, and hidden decisions shaping modern warfare.